Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another awesome episode of Living Loved. I'm your host, Cassandra Gonzalez, a certified Christian counselor in Texas. And the podcast we have today is to explore what it means to live just totally anchored in God's love and what He says about us. And so today's episode is titled Words Against the Odds, and we have an amazing guest today. We'll be talking about overcoming adversity of labels of the world that they give us, rising above, and just being totally anointed in what God has for us. So our guest today, she is an anointed daughter of the King, and from writing to speaking and sharing her testimony, she has so many stories of being right in the face of adversity and overcoming all of that. So today's guest, she's an answered prayer, and I know that her message will allow God to press a word on anybody that's listening's heart. So today my guest is Michelle Steiner. Hello, welcome. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
Wonderful. And so, just touching on the intro a little bit, like we mentioned, you have faced so many adversities and challenges in life. If you want to just touch on it really, really quickly, but I would love to share with the audience that on the other side of it today, you are joining us as a writer, a teacher, a speaker, a photographer, and someone whose story is just a powerful reminder that of what God can do when we just totally trust Him.
Definitely. I have a learning disability. I have dyscalculia, which is a math disability. I also have visual perception issues that affect my brain, but not my eyes. And I have limited hand dexterity in both of my hands. And a lot of that has given me a lot of difficulty and a lot of heartbreak, but God has turned all that around for His glory. And it's just amazing what He has done.
I love that, Michelle. I'm excited. I first off, Michelle reached out to Living Love to be a guest, and I so excitedly, after hearing just that short little bit of how God has transformed your life, wanted to bring you right on. And so, outside of sharing a little bit about who you are and welcoming you to Living Loved, just the heartbeat of our podcast here is just showing everybody how they can they can live daily knowing that they are loved by God and like how big He loves
Mhm.
them. And so stories like yours and mine and all of our other guests we've had. You're my fourth episode, so woohoo! I do 10 episodes, so I'm almost to my mid-season episode. So I'm glad that you're here from beginning. I love that. So if you could just start sharing a little bit about who you are, where you live at, kind of where God has brought you from, and a little bit about what you do now.
Sure. I live in Pennsylvania with my husband Ron and our two cats, Jack and Sparrow.
I love
I
it.
Yeah, when we adopted them, the people were big Disney fans, and we thought, oh, so cute. So we kept them. Yeah, I I have a blog called Michelle's Mission where I write about my life with a learning disability. I do a lot of photography along with that. I'm not able to drive because of my disability, so I get a chance to take pictures of flowers and other things that I see on my walks. I write about just my experience with having one. And I tie a lot of nature to that as well. I might talk about the process of accepting my disabilities like a flower that's blooming, or butterflies are another really big thing for me. So I might talk about the transformation that a butterfly goes through and that whole process and what I've been through as well. And I also work in a school as a paraeducator or a teacher's aide. I work with students that have disabilities, and I find it so rewarding to be in the classroom. And I work with seventh graders this year, and just to be able to help them be able to navigate being in a regular ed class and not only helping them with their work. Yeah, and it's just God has really brought a lot of that purpose out in a lot of with having that, because I understand what a lot of my students are going through. Not all of them, but I understand what it's like to be that student that's in the room and you're struggling. And a
Oh,
lot of people don't
certainly.
know what that is.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, even learning disabilities in the mental space. So I'm a certified
Hmm.
Christian counselor.
Yeah.
I do family, marriage, youth, and addiction counseling.
Hmm.
I'm working on learning like grief counseling and stuff like that. But really, if you can't do, like, teach, because learning with disabilities, whether they're learning disabilities at birth, like how you experienced, or anything that
Mhm.
we may have been diagnosed with or unknowingly lived with our whole life. I had a late in life diagnosis of ADHD. I suffer from anxiety and depression
Mhm.
in certain seasons. God has certainly done a
Mhm.
work in my life about making sure that I feel more whole in Him now, but that those
Right.
ailments that I live by in this human body, they're still there and we still manage with them. So that's amazing that you
Exactly.
are meeting those kids right in that season where they might feel it the biggest and like the loudest. That's so
Mhm.
crazy cool that you just take where you were supposed to be positioned in life, I guess, by other people's definition, and you totally made it
Yes.
your own, girlfriend. Good on you. And with God, too. I mean, take us back to those
Exactly.
early years. Like, what were some of the challenges that you might have faced when you were the same age as the kids that you teach now?
A lot of the challenges I faced at that was struggling not only with the coursework, but just how I viewed myself. I didn't view myself as smart. I didn't, I really struggled with learning. I also struggled with, well, what was my purpose going to be like? And because I can just remember being really afraid, oh, how am I going to be able to handle this work? And I thought I have to be really complete in order for God to be able to use me someday. And that hasn't been the case. And I also, it was really difficult for me with just socially. It was always hard. Even from the very beginning, I went to a very small school district where everybody knew each other and it was
Yeah.
close knit if you were one of them. And I wasn't. So it was really a difficult experience for me. The bullying started really early and it got worse as I went through school. And I was really lucky. I was raised in a nice family that my family was Catholic, but
Yeah.
I didn't get to experience that relationship with God. That wasn't something that really came along until I was in high school. And I can remember the bullying got a lot worse. And I just didn't feel connected, and our groups became more defined. And there
Mm-hmm.
was a faith based art group that was just right outside of my school district
Oh,
that
cool.
I got involved with. And I found other teenagers that really shared my interests, and I could shed a lot of that reputation of being an outcast. And God was starting to work. I was starting to, well, he always worked, but I could start to see that God wasn't angry and it was having that relationship and that God wanted to have this relationship with me. And I was just so drawn into that changed a lot in my life with that. And I can just look back on that and what a difference that made in my life.
That seriously sounds like in a time period where others' voices could be so discouraging and so hurtful and
Hmm.
leave that type of impression on your heart, that it would have been so much easier to believe that lie. You mentioned it. There's that one,
Yeah.
I always call them threads. And you think of it like you pull one thread and it
Hmm.
unravels everything. And it's that one lie that the enemy has us believing always, that we need to be some type of polished, pretty good version for God to
Hmm.
show up at his footsteps. And it's wild that you say that, because I've done a lot of research, and in my guests I've seen this, but I can also speak from personal experience that I grew up Catholic and I did all my sacraments. I did every
Hmm.
Sunday, youth group on
Yeah.
Wednesdays, all the trips, the youth trips, all of it. So I was a fully
Hmm.
immersed, totally born and baptized and raised up in it Catholic. And ever since stepping into my own exploration spiritually and finding like Christianity, I was saved in
Hmm.
a really amazing Bible based Baptist style church here in San Antonio on like the west side. And they really opened up my eyes to saying, like, no, you don't have to show up any type of way. You can come to God just as you are, and it is silly for you to think that he doesn't already know that thought process
Right.
and is probably sitting back with his arms folded like, no ma'am, like, you can come to me however you are.
Yeah.
um and so those strong feelings that those bullies
Mhm.
implanted in your such a young heart, like, that community you mentioned, that art community, that youth art community that was faith-based, I have a feeling, and that just stood out to me in your story, that that was the moment that God was whispering, like, I have more for you. Wow.
Yes.
I have
He
goosebumps. Gosh, I love it when you do that. And so outside of all of those like self-doubt and like discouraging voices you encountered and just also encountering that like here's some more for you moment from God, can you share how that began to like reshape how you saw yourself, like how it redefined some of those fears you had and self-doubt and like feeling low where people were trying to place you?
I can remember it really opened my eyes up a lot on what I wanted to do and that I had a purpose. It still took a lot. I was still
Oh,
working through a
it's
lot
hard
of that.
work. It is hard
Yeah, it was.
redefining
Especially
all of
as a
that.
kid, I was still working through a lot of those things.
Sure.
But God also placed people in my life, though, and that discouragement too, because I also faced people that told me in school that I was never going to be able to go to college because of my math. That was a learning support teacher, and I suggested a trade school, but it just didn't seem like that was my interest. But God really placed some other people in my life that made a difference. I had a student teacher who told me, I think you can go to college if you want to because you can do college. You know how to study. You're smart. And I can look and I can't remember what her name is, but I can just look back and think that sometimes was the voice that got me through all those years when it got hard at school. And I also can remember I had some, God also gave me a group after the religious one. I found an adult writing group, and I was the youngest as a late teenager,
Nice.
and I got that chance. I wrote some poetry and some other stuff I would not want to read today, but when they always encourage me,
Everybody
you should
starts
really write
somewhere. Everybody starts somewhere.
exactly. And they said you should really write about having a learning disability. I said, "Oh no, that's way too personal." And they got to see me grow as a writer and a person. And 30 some years later, we're still in each other's lives. And we meet once a month to talk about our. Yeah. So God was really placing that in there. And when things got hard at college, they couldn't fix the situation. They couldn't fix the fact that I had a disability or couldn't understand math. But they could be there for me. They could be friends. And I was blessed. My parents have also been very supportive of me from the time I was very young and explaining that I had a disability and just being there and my advocate for me until I was ready to be my own advocate as well. And I can just look back on that, that I've just been so blessed with having a great support system with that.
I mean, not only
And
the support system,
mhm,
but like writing and speaking and putting your art out there,
yeah,
like you're talking about, especially even now in your later
yeah,
years. Like that seems like somebody with a learning disability and all the discouragement that you received early on would like run away from. But what divinely
yeah,
that God did that plan and place those people that even those tiny phrases of like, yeah, you can go to college and yeah, you can write if you want to write. Like that encouraging, affirmative,
yes.
like you can make whatever you want of this life with God at your side. I love that. He called you just right into that space.
He really did. And I can just even see when I was young getting called into that because reading and writing were something that I gravitated towards. That was the first thing they found out I was really good at. And my dad found a story about a dinosaur I wrote in second or third grade and said, this is really good. And that just
Yeah.
became, reading and writing became my world. And I can remember the church also knew that I could read really well. So when our class would do a mass, they would have me get up there and read
Oh my gosh,
scripture
that was almost
because
like training for public speaking.
yeah, so because they knew the priest knew that I could speak really well and I could read. So I really credit that for a lot of who I am today
Yeah,
came from a lot of the
other thing
yeah.
I guess I should mention, because I mentioned it before, that there is like that
Hmm.
Catholicism upbringing versus people who may stay
Yeah,
away from Catholicism.
right.
A lot of people are very judgmental over it and they're very like hard on that
Hmm.
certain religion in specifics. But like I was raised a military brat and I was able to travel Europe and see like all the
Right.
European cathedrals and the Catholic churches and the
Mm.
masses and the Vatican, all of that stuff. And so experiencing all of that as a young Catholic and knowing like the different foundational things that Catholicism
Hmm.
places in your heart spiritually. I can't say it's all bad. I would never come out and say it's all bad, because there's also
Right.
huge faith role that plays into helping you shape that calling, because you were experiencing God encounters at that age, in
Yep.
that season, in that religion. And
I
so
was.
when I look back on my time as a Catholic, I try to honor it in a way that, like, at least I didn't grow up knowing not about Jesus, you know? It wasn't all
Oh, it's
sunshines and rainbows, but it was still a really great way to grow up in a spiritual, I guess, room.
oh, yeah, it definitely is a regret. It definitely was. I mean, it just was not how I decided is to go forward as an adult. And yes, I went through that angry phase, with that. But I've come to realize that uh, some people, that's what a lot of my family and I have great friends, and that is how they can connect with God. And it's not for me to judge that too. I have a different way, and they have theirs, and we've just come to that respect. And that's something my parents have really good.
I was going to ask you that just now. Like, what
Mhm.
role did your parents play in that faith walk while you were facing so much adversity so young, and learning these new groups that you could totally mesh into and be a part of?
Mhm.
What were they kind of speaking over you in those times?
I think one of the things that my dad was wonderful. He was the person that really, for being Catholic, he would believe, well, I mean, anybody can, but he would honestly believe that it's not just about memorizing prayers, but it's about how you're going to apply things in your life. And when he taught Sunday school, or CCD as we called it, he
Yeah,
would bring a newspaper and he would start talking about real life events. And that's how our dinner table was. My dad would
I
talk about
love
things, and we'd
that.
all have our opinions. And I got to see the different perspectives of maybe how different people feel. So I think that was a really big way. My parents also knew what my interests were. So I can remember whenever we took a little break from the writing group, that from the faith-based organization, I can remember my dad saying, "Hey, I heard on the radio about this writing group. Maybe you would want to go to that. Here's the number to call the person."
You to stay in.
Yeah. And they encouraged me in buying books. My dad read me a story every night when I was little, and they always bought me books whenever I was young, and took me to the library. And it was finding that gift that I was good at, because there was lots of things that I certainly, God did not give me the gift to do, but God gives everybody that purpose. And my mom and dad also encouraged independence for me too, because they knew that I was going to need to be able to live on my own. I was going to have to know how to take care of myself, and they really wanted me to have a job. So it was really emphasized, well, what do you like to do? How can we support you with that? And that really became key, especially whenever I had people telling me that, like, I had a psychiatrist who said, you're not most likely not going to go beyond community college. Or at school, people telling me you're going to have limited job choices. You're going to have all these things, and using accommodations is cheating. My family was the one that really reassured me that it was to follow those interests, and to go out there and to put forth that effort, and to really follow a lot of the lead that God was sending me in.
Appalled by that in the best way possible, because parents could have
Hmm.
used what you have going on in your life as their own personal excuse to maybe hold you too close, or not teach you enough, or maybe assume that you just wouldn't know it, so we're not going to make that effort. What amazing parents that you have. See, I learned the difference in opinion and in religion and everything from
Hmm.
being immersed as a
Hmm.
military brat in kind of like a melting pot of different bases growing up.
Wow.
And so I was able to
Right.
see
So,
that
yeah.
everybody has something different going on in every country I would visit. I just got that like totally
Hmm.
world cultural, like full circle thing. My mom had us traveling like every weekend living over there. So it was really at a young age amazing to see the differences in the world and the differences in cultures and people and
Yeah.
religions. I think if I could just pause us right here before we move on any further in
Hmm.
this episode, this is just God dropping nuggets to parents, because learning disability or no learning disability, being encouraging of your kids' interests and telling them to stay in those interests and to keep out of trouble even, but also being
Yes.
that shining like lighthouse of a pillar parent where you can say it's okay if you're going to grow up different. Like we all are just kind of facing
Mhm.
the odds and knowing what you're about to kind of walk through life with. Let's make it something amazing. Like that sounds like your parents had it right on the head with you. And that's so encouraging. Just as a mom myself, I'm a homeschool mom. So with my 9 and 2 year old, it's really difficult to manage all the feelings and the learning styles and everything here within the home.
Mhm.
But I also know, like, if I do it right, my parents had a huge role in my
Yep.
upbringing too. And they were very like,
Good.
you can do anything you want to do, parents. They never discouraged me from anything. And so I got that amazing golden nugget growing up of safely knowing my parents, approved of anything that I would try to put my efforts towards. I love that for us. We need
It's
more parents like
awesome.
ours. And
Agreed.
so that's a good reminder too, though. That's a good reminder, though. I almost want to say, like, I love some of the adversity in my testimony and in your testimony because when discouragement comes like that, like, what truths from God did you stand on in those seasons?
I think one of the things it took me a while to do that was that God had a plan and had a purpose for my life. And it
Yeah,
was about questioning that. And I think that was the thing that I really needed. I was in a baptism for one of my family members. And I can just remember the preacher was talking about God's purpose. And this is after I was not Catholic anymore. And I wondered to myself, where's my purpose at? Where is your good plan at? I was living on my own. I had a couple really bad relationships. And I wondered, okay, am I going to meet somebody? Because people have said that you're not going to meet anybody with having a disability. And I just wondered
sure.
about that. And I think it was that questioning that God really did really show that purpose to me. And it wasn't always in the easiest way. I had to move back in with my parents for financial reasons. I was loving being independent, but it was that season to go back. And it was God telling me, it's time for you to go to university. Your job is downsizing. And this time, but it was
Wow.
perfect because I was able to live back at home with my parents for a season
Yeah, so he
and I
stepped
didn't have to
directly
worry
in.
about bills and I could focus in on school. And I found everything just came together. I found a program that had the least amount of math and science possible. They had disability accommodations, and I even had a ride to campus because my parents were working at that time, and the school was far away from our home. And my mom was at church, and she was telling one of our relatives, "Oh, Michelle's going back to school. I don't know how we're going to take her." My cousin worked on campus, and she said, "I'll pick her up."
Oh
So
my gosh.
I have never had
Perfect.
the funding came in too, so I was able to graduate debt free from college.
Oh my
Every single thing,
gosh.
and it was so much better because I advocated for myself and I made Dean's List first semester. I had really improved grades compared to community college, and during that time, yep, that was God. And then
Wow.
even my relationship was God had a plan and a purpose for that. I can just remember, and there were so many signs that I can see now.
Hmm.
Years before I met my husband, I was volunteering at our art center, and I had a friend that asked me, "Are you seeing anyone right now?" And I said, "Oh, not this time." And he goes, I think you're going to meet somebody at a place like this. I met my wife when I was traveling. That's where I met him because I had a prayer. I said, "God, do not send anybody to me until it's the right person." And I was volunteering at the art center years later, and I was walking down the street, and my husband saw me and thought, "Who's that girl? Where's she going?" It turns out we were going to the same place. He was coming in to play guitar that night, and we knew mutual friends. And then somebody from church had a dream about me even before I met him, too. And my friend said, "Michelle, I had this dream about you. You were in a vintage wedding dress and you were standing outside the courthouse. And I don't know who this guy is, but you were getting married." And I thought, okay, I can see the vintage dress. That's my style. I love that. I wondered why I'd have the courthouse, and I also wondered who this guy was. Well, we had our reception at the art center, and the photographer had us, and I was in a vintage dress, and our photographer had us go take a walk in the park, and behind the park is the courthouse. And I
Oh,
didn't think about it till I got the pictures back.
really?
That was the prophet, that was the dream that somebody else had about me.
Coming to
And we were in the same
life.
place at the same time, but totally blind to each other. And it was God saying, I sent you the right person in my timing, and I'm going to fulfill what I want to do with your life.
Absolutely love that because gosh, I know we're mid recording this podcast, but I'm just like falling in love with your testimony over here because we have so many similarities.
Yes.
I was a single mother for a while and living that life after so many failed relationships, you really do
Hmm.
start to get that fear like, am I good enough for anybody in this lifetime or on this planet or like anything?
Right.
And I know that, and it was because so many of my relationships had failed because of my ADHD or my anxiety or any
Hmm.
type of like a depression episode and people just wouldn't understand. And it's when you're trying to like call out and say like I'm valuable, I have fun, like I'm a good fun loving person, like all of this stuff doesn't define me. It's just a part of who I am. And when you take those moments, because I was single for about 5 years before
Hmm.
entertaining any other type of relationships, and then I had my son like out of wedlock right after getting back good with God
Hmm.
and coming back to Jesus as I guess a Christian. I was a baby Christian, so I still like was trying to do this half foot in, half foot out. Had
Yeah.
my son out of wedlock, and then that relationship failed. So here I am in single motherhood, and I was just like, okay, God, like, okay, I'm just gonna be alone the rest of my life, and I'm a-okay with that. As long as I have you, I'm good. And I think it was that moment, and then him kind of loving me to life the way that I'm trying to show people now, that he
Hmm.
met my husband. I was a barista in a coffee shop, and my
Oh my
husband just walked right on in and scooped me up. And we met, and I
goodness.
think we're married within like a month or two. So
That's
we met and
awesome.
we just knew it was it, and we fell in love, and God blessed it. And He blessed that patience that I had when most
Hmm.
nights I'm sure my heart was crying out very impatient, like cries of desperation, of loneliness. But I guess what advice would you give somebody listening who feels maybe like that their diagnosis, no matter what it may be, whether it's a learning disability or mental disability, or any attribute, I guess the world might label them as weakness
Hmm.
or might disqualify them. How would you encourage that person? Because we both, I'm sure, can a little bit.
Definitely. I think you have to be with someone that loves you with your disability or whatever that weakness is, or whatever that thing that the world might consider not to be strong. You have to have that person needs to be all right with that. And if they're not, then they're not the right person for you. I can remember my ex breaking up with me, and he said, I know you could drive if you really wanted to, and I'm tired of taking you places. And that was not the person that God had for me.
No, not at all.
And when I told my husband on our first date that I couldn't drive, he was the first person who said, well, how does it make you feel when I said I had a learning disability?
Oh,
And nobody else ever asked me that. And it has been a learning curve. There are sometimes situations where maybe he doesn't quite understand
yeah.
things as well. And we've had to work out some things. But for the most part, if you have somebody that is willing to love and is willing to accept you, then that's the person that God's going to call into your life. And I also think, too, I was also at that point where I thought, I can be happy with my life. I mean, yes, I
Yeah.
wanted to meet somebody, but I can also be happy with. I was going back to school. I was involved with a lot of activities that I enjoyed. I had friends. I could have been happy being single,
Yeah.
but God decided He was going to bless me with something even more.
Oh man, what an honor. And I love that. And I try to encourage people in that may feel
Hmm.
that lost, weak, disqualified
Hmm.
feeling in life that No, like God knows every single tiny little
Yes,
desire of your
he does.
heart, and He will honor it if you trust Him. If I could just shout
Mm-hmm.
that from the mountaintops, I could, because that's where you start with everything. I mean, just trusting Him. I know that in a moment of weakness, like we have testimony in that. I love that you
Yes.
mentioned your prophesied over like marriage photo, because
Yeah.
in that season where I was single and I was longing for that type of love, God poured into that cup for me. Like I was never
Yep.
felt unworthy and unloved. I always felt worthy and I always felt loved by the
Mm-hmm.
Father. And I knew like this is enough. And if this is enough,
Right.
I'm enough, like I feel okay with that. And I think that point of surrender and contentment in Him is where you find that testimony power, because who else can say, after so many failed relationships, with your learning disability, with those things that really were there to
Mm-hmm.
wear you down, like someone telling you, no, you're not worth picking up, and I'm so tired of driving you around. Like, that's a hurtful place to sit in and be in
Right.
when that person that you're in a relationship with, you're depending on them for loving feelings, is only kind of spewing hurt at you. Um, I would say that my weakness turned into testimony is this podcast, this ministry, this mission that I have, because
Mm-hmm.
previous to that, I was walking around, addicted, lost, fearful, scared. I was just doing days as they came,
Mm-hmm.
band-aiding all of those awful feelings, hurt feelings, with alcohol and pills and
Right.
meaningless relationships that I was getting in and out of. There's some relationships I had very similar, like you mentioned, where God just kind of grew me a little, but then also let me know, like, this still might not be the person for you. And spiritual hindsight is 2020. But
Yes.
looking back, when I got saved in that church I mentioned to you here in San Antonio as a baby Christian, that that pastor is amazing. First of all, shout out to Pastor Jackson. He was like a father for me too, a spiritual father, learning me all these
Mm-hmm.
new concepts as a Christian. And that church and those people and the way they loved and the way they showed Jesus
Mm-hmm.
love, I was like, how can I copy this? So one altar call I remember specifically, I mean, it was hard to look up at him because the light was just coming off of him, just God's light.
Oh.
And he had his hands on me and he was saying, you're going to prophesy to millions of people. I see you as this minister who is going to bring God to everybody's feet, and tell them like this is the
Mm-hmm.
manna that God has for them here in this time, is just that relationship with him and having him love on them and love them back to life. I mean, that's just entirely where the name came from. But Living Love, this podcast, was never supposed to happen. And I had a good girlfriend encourage me. Her name is Erica. I was a guest on her podcast first. And it's just where I
Oh,
started to
wow.
talk a little bit about my ministry and this. And she goes, girl, you're good at this. You need to keep going and like make your own thing. I was sharing my desires with her. And ever since, this is
Mm-hmm.
only 4 episodes in, and I've guest spotted on some other podcasts too. But in the short time I've been in this podcast world where I am speaking to the masses and I can gain numbers for the Lord,
Mm-hmm.
I have been on fire. God has lit such a fire under me. Not only that, to keep this routine of continuing episodes weekly, but also to share all of these testimonies. People from different walks of life, like yourself, and all my other guests who are amazing. But really, the heartbeat of this podcast was to learn to live loved by God, how His
Mm-hmm.
love changes the way that you view yourself and your calling, and just stepping all the way into it. Because living that baby Christian half in, half out life, even that was
Mm-hmm.
for me. And I knew Jesus then. And so for people to say, like, oh,
Right.
Christian, I'm good, we're good, I'm getting to heaven, they just need to keep going down that road of continuing to encourage people, continuing to have people share their testimony like this so others can see that, yeah, God doesn't just pick the favored or the blessed or the saved. Like, He comes after the addicted and the disabled and the
Mm-hmm.
people that the world looks at them and just writes them off.
Right.
What does
I
living
agree.
what does living loved, I guess, since now that you have that concept, what does living loved look like for you in your everyday life now?
I think living in love means that I get that chance to really show, live with purpose, and I get that chance to love others and guide them to their purpose. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's really hard when I'm at my job too. If they expect me to do math, all the kids know, or we'll soon find out. Do not ask me to help you with math. And I can remember there was a student, and he was struggling, and it was math, and I couldn't help him, and I just remember looking up at the heavens and wondering, God, why do you have me here? You know I can't do this. And somebody said, this student's crying. Another student's crying. And I went over to that student and I said, I understand what it is like to really struggle like that. And I can't help you, but I want you to tell me when you are afraid so you can I can get you the resources you need. And before I knew it, that student wasn't afraid. He was answering questions and he was able to raise his hand and work. And God just said at that moment, see, this is why I put you here. It's to be able not to teach math, but I put you in that moment. And anytime I ask that question when it gets difficult, God will just put somebody in my life that I can help, or will speak a word over me. And it'll just speak that into that situation. And it's just sometimes that's the why behind a lot of things that happen. I also think it's how I get a chance to be able to connect by sharing my story, that I can encourage somebody else that maybe
Yeah.
has a disability, or through my writing. I'll have a lot of people that will say, well, that's my story, or I thought I was the only one that struggled with that. And I get that chance to love and to encourage somebody else as well.
I love that. You really were put in those places and spaces for that because everyone sees learning disability as okay, it's the learning disability, so we need to teach them how to learn.
Hmm.
But no one filters or processes the feelings that come in those big moments where you feel defeated if you don't know how to learn something. Like I totally get that.
Exactly.
I totally get that. So for the listener, I guess who feels like the odds might be stacked against them, they're facing all of this adversity, give them some words of encouragement, I guess, to start gaining that same God confidence. Because, like, once you realize you were meant to be there for a purpose, even if it's not teaching and learning with your disability,
Hmm.
you are there to shine that loving light. And what an example you just gave, because that is exactly how the Father loves us. He just says, whenever you're afraid, come to me.
Yes, exactly. It's going to God whenever you're afraid, or even going to him when you're upset or you're angry. He knows
Yeah.
what you're feeling, what you're thinking, and he can handle those feelings. And it's just asking him and having him show that to you. It may not come at that moment, but God will start revealing a lot of that. And he'll also start to show what your purpose is and what your strengths are. I may not be able to do math, but I can read really well and I love to write and I can encourage somebody. I can also go in and sometimes just have that compassion with somebody. I think that's a big thing, is ask God, well, what is that purpose, and define that why, and also to go in and say, okay, how can I turn this into something good? Or can you show me a way that, or a lesson, or just something with that? And I think it's just focusing in. God gives all of us gifts, and it's different for everybody. So there
Right.
might be people that can do certain things and other people can't, and nobody's the exact same. And I find when I go and I live in that purpose that God has given me, and the activities that He gives me, and the gifts, I'm happy. I am not
Oh, that's
negative. I
so
am,
good. That's
yeah,
such a good word right there.
yeah,
Yeah, that's the clearest message you
yep.
could say. Like when we feel like we are weak and we're not walking in a certain purpose or calling, it just feels a little
Hmm.
off. You always feel like you're misstepping, maybe.
Right.
I would love to add for the audience, like your weakness, it's not a wall, it's definitely a doorway for God's power. I mean, He glorifies Himself
Yep.
in
Hmm.
everything He does. And so, if He can even use any one of us in any one of our weaknesses,
Yep.
to glorify him, what a wonderful God we have, because it's always with us and him at the center. And so with that,
Yes.
I want to say, like, I know we've talked about so many amazing ways that God has worked in our own lives,
Hmm.
but I have to do this live on camera just to show people, because not walking in your purpose is one thing, not knowing God is one thing, because we all have those opportunities to get to know Him at any moment, anytime. But definitely this part, meditating on His Word and cracking this thing open. If you don't do it, at least try it out once a day. I have gotten in the
Hmm.
habit, I haven't read the Bible front to back. This is how my Christian walk has gone. So I go, okay, God, what do you have for me? And I pray and meditate on it in my heart, and I crack this sucker
Hmm.
open, and whatever's right there is for me. And God kind of tapped me on the shoulder while you were speaking earlier in the episode and said, hey, show them this fun little trick we like to do together. So I did. I cracked it open, and the first thing it brought me to was Psalm 144. This is a song to the Lord who preserves and prospers his people. Tell me why that's what we just landed on. And blessed
Yes.
be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle, my loving kindness and my fortress, my high tower and my deliverer, my shield and the one whom I take refuge, who subdues my people under me. Gosh, that's so good. That is such a good Psalms 144, and that's verse 2. That was the Psalm of David. And just knowing my history of the Bible and just knowing the characters of the Bible, like David was so looked upon and fond
Hmm.
by God, like he was just God's treasure. And so knowing that that Song of David is what God points us right to, right here in the middle of this episode, Psalm 144, it's just a good reminder that his loving kindness, his fortress, he is the high tower and the deliverer. And so leaving this audience with all of this goodness of God, it's just like overflowing in this
Yes.
episode. Just what's one memorable moment where God just like clearly stepped in for you? I can see in your story so far that there were little like spaces where he met you, but I'm talking like fully where you met him.
I think that where I really met God had to be just in all these with working with the school. I think that was a really
Oh,
clear message
yes.
for that because I get that chance and just a lot of the struggles, whether it was going through college and or I think that was one of the things too because I used to think I'm only going to be complete if my disability goes away and then I can be
Oh,
this complete person. And when I got the bachelor's degree, that was one of the things where God did show a lot of that completeness and said, "Okay, you still have a disability, that's okay. You can I mean, it's all right to have that weakness if that's what it is because you're strong with me." And I think that was just, I started to see that God really was coming forward. That was one of those moments. And he gave me another vision that really stuck with me. Would remember if I had a really hard day, I knew where graduations were at. We had our high school graduation there, and I'd walk by that building every day, and God would tell me, you, I want you to picture something. It's not happening now, but there's going to be a really warm day in June and you're going to, or May, and you're going to walk across that stage and you're going to get your bachelor's degree. It's going to happen. And I would just walk past there and sometimes those days were really hard. Sometimes I didn't do well on a test or I really worried about what was coming in the future. And it happened just as it was told. I can remember it was a beautiful, warm May day. And I just walked across that stage and I got my bachelor's degree. And my disability didn't leave that day, but I was gained that confidence and that moment.
that is such a beautiful message. Just God is always so for us. Like he is just so on our
Hmm.
team and in our corner. Wow, I'm just so like so many goosebumps in this episode. I love it. Okay, well, this is the worst part that I guess I have to say, but
Okay.
in closing, or since we're wrapping everything up, I really want to say again, like amazing God story with you. And I'm so happy you got
Thank
to come
you.
on today and share your heart and your journey, everything he's done for your goodness, everything he's going to continue doing. Can you mention one more time before we move on your blog so that people can keep up with you? I would love to as well. Just join your blog and just
Sure.
keep following your story. It's such an amazing testimony.
Awesome. My blog, you can find me at my blog, www.michellesmission.com.
I love that. And so I like to kind of play a little game with my guests before
Okay.
we leave.
Okay.
And it's this or that faith edition. And so what I do is I just give you two options. You just pick the one that speaks to you the most, no overthinking it. Share a couple of thoughts
Okay.
if you'd like to, but just go with your first thought already. You ready?
Okay.
Okay.
Ready.
Morning prayer or bedtime prayer?
I morning prayer.
Morning prayer. Me too. Totally me too. Worship music or quiet time?
I like worship music.
Me too. I like for the quieter times. I like the slow, like deep in your soul worship
Mm-hmm.
music for sure.
Yes.
Writing in a journal or speaking the encouragement out loud.
I like to write in a journal. Even though I don't have great handwriting, I love to write that, and I sometimes think that those ideas just come out, and I'm able to type them later.
For sure. That's a very intimate place with God is journaling.
Mm-hmm.
I really seek a lot more of this opportunities to speak this encouragement out loud myself,
Mm-hmm.
but my journaling is such a sacred place with me and God. So mountains for solitude or oceans for reflection. Ooh, that's a good one.
I like I like oceans. I don't get a chance to do that a whole lot where I live at, so it's always really special.
I have about a 3 hour clear your mind drive before I get to any type of beachfront ocean. I'm near the Gulf, so I'm able
Hmm.
to just, if I need to disappear for a
Nice.
day, it's 3 hours away, the ocean for me, which is awesome because that is a great reflection time for me. I always stand in front of the ocean and I go, man, this makes me feel so small compared to everything that
Yep.
God has created. Um, but let's see the next one. Coffee and Bible or tea and Bible?
That depends on the morning, but or the day. But usually, if it's the morning, it's coffee and Bible because then I'm focused, and then maybe at night I'll have a nice a cup of tea
Yeah.
if I
I'm
do
such a
reflection then.
caffeine freak, okay? I replaced all of my addictions with caffeine and I need to just lay off a little bit. But I am also a huge sucker for like peppermint honey tea. That's my thing. If I can just get a nice peppermint
Hmm.
honey cup of mug, it depends on the mug too. Like if it's in a good mug, I'll sit down. Not that any of that is required to get into your Bible, but it's really a good thing.
You'll have to try. You have to try Candy Cane Lane Tea by Celestial Seasonings. It is
Ooh, I
so
love
good.
that brand, so I will. Okay, so I love those
Yeah.
answers. This game obviously reminds us that no matter how connected we are to God, or whether it's like
Hmm.
worship or prayer or nature, the important thing is that we do it. This game is to just highlight just getting into it with God because He meets us wherever we
Hmm.
are. Okay, so as we're wrapping everything up, I just want to highlight in this episode, Michelle, thank you for being a vessel for God again and reminding us of his love, that it doesn't just carry us through these challenges, it truly transforms us into walking testimonies to share with everybody for him. Your words, they really truly spoke and turned, you spoke these words over the audience, and I am totally just giving you a badge of honor right now. You are the total embodiment of making your words just stack up against the odds. And I'm so certain that the Lord is so delighted in you for really just being who you are and amplifying him in your life.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure being on your show too. Thank
Thank you.
you.
And so this is just in closing an invitation for anybody. So if you're struggling, just remember to be gentle with yourself like God is gentle with all of our hearts. Let this be a reminder that you are on your very own learning path, just like Michelle and I were. And you're learning how to be loved every day. And God delights in using what the world might call weakness as a stage for his glory in you. So remember that the same God who made your incredible testimony is the same God that loves us all daily. That never ever dwindles with him. What I'd like to do, Michelle, is just close in prayer. And from that point, we can jump
Okay.
off tonight. Thank you for joining us again.
All right. Thank
All
you.
right. So, Father, we thank you for being the strength that we can call on. And God, in our weakness, we know that you are amplified and that it is your testimony, your calling, your anointing, and your story written for us. You equip every listener. God, please equip them with the tools that they need to step fully into the calling that you've placed on their lives. God, I call the Holy Spirit with it, that lives inside everybody listening to move. God, just encourage their hearts when they feel weary and remind them of your unfailing love. Empower them to walk in boldness and not in fear, and knowing through Michelle's story and through the things that we've shared today that you go before them and you are within them. Thank you so much, God, for sending us today's guest, Michelle. Her story definitely amplifies what we already know about us, which is that you are totally for us. Let Michelle's powerful testimony shine a light that many like her and like me can have their lives shine so bright as a testimony of your goodness. I ask now that all brothers and sisters listening know that they are loved by you in a way that no earthly words can describe. And I pray a hedge of protection over my audience and all my guests. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you again, Michelle. I thank you for joining us tonight on
Amen.
Living
Thank
Loved. And
you.
until next time, friends, remember you're deeply loved by God. Okay, are you still there?